the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Fans of old TV westerns know who Dale Robertson is. He played roving investigator Jim Hardy in Tales of Wells Fargo, and Ben Calhoun, owner of an incomplete railroad line in The Iron Horse. His wife Susan says so many people asked him to write his autobiography, but he hesitated because he didn't know how it was going to end. Now Susan has preserved his legacy in her book, Bucking Hollywood.
Well, he was very famous, very good looking, and very well known at the time. He did almost 40 films, including series and TV. Most of his films were westerns. Women just loved him, and he was so easy to be around, and he loved to tell stories, and in such an interesting way. And he considered himself more of a personality rather than an actor, but he had both. He was his own person. He didn't compromise himself. And I'm trying to convey that if you have talent, you don't have to compromise yourself in Hollywood. He didn't really spend a lot of time memorizing his lines. And he knew what would sound best coming out of his mouth. And a lot of directors sort of appreciated that because it turned out better in certain ways. And then he did have some disagreements with some producers that had written the stories and they wanted everything to be word for word. But that wasn't Dale. He would try. And he was a perfectionist. If things didn't look right, he always considered the audience. And he could pick up things that need to be redone because he thought it would look phony to the audience. You know, he didn't compromise himself in the industry or in life.
Why should somebody read this book?
I think there's a lot of stories just about who he was as a person. There was a situation where he went blind for almost a year, and he actually, through his faith, made it.
What happened?
And he and some other young boys, they lived out in the country, and they jumped into a river-type area where they were trying to swim. They think he got maybe an infection in his eyes.
So that's when he was a kid.
Yes. You know, I go through his whole life story. I really started out talking about how we met. I was a flight attendant. Then I get into his family, and he went to the Oklahoma Military Institute and went to World War II. And before he went into World War II and he was boxing, he was approached to go out to Hollywood and get into a movie about a boxer. Golden Boy was the name of it. But then went into World War II. And then there was an accident in World War II where he was in the hospital for 9 months. And then he got an honorable discharge. And he remembered being approached several times. Several boys, when they were in California before they shipped out, they all had their pictures made for their mothers. And this photography place where they went, they put his picture in the window because he was, such a handsome man. And his mother received some letters that they would like to have him come out to Hollywood. And they were searching for leading men at that time. And when he got to Hollywood, they weren't searching as much. It wasn't that easy for him to get started. But I think on his third film, that's when it was still a small part. That's when they actually recognized him. And women were just going crazy. He took his hat off. He had real thick hair. It was called Fighting Man in the Plains, and Dale was portraying Jesse James. But that's how he sort of got recognized. And it just happened one film after another after that. What he was most famous for was a series called The Tales of Wells Fargo, and that's in the late 50s and early 60s when all of the Western films were just all over. And his was one of the most popular. When people hear his name first, who knew him and remember him, they think of Tales of Wells Fargo.
Did you enjoy writing about this?
I did. Yeah, it took me 5 years.
Jeez.
But I wanted to do it right, and it's a big book, and it's almost like a coffee table book because it has so many pictures. I was really surprised that Page Publishing accepted it because I thought I would have to cut it all down and take out a lot of pictures and cut out a lot of it. But they accepted all of it. And I was really surprised.
Well, good for you, Susan. Thank you. There are a lot of reasons people publish books. And in Ricky McGoldrick's case, he wanted his kids to have a story their mom wrote. They raised cattle on a farm outside Austin, and a few years before his wife died in 2014, she wrote a book about an incident with her granddaughter. It's entitled The Green Frog Mishap.
My granddaughter and daughter were taking the trash out to the curb, and there was a little green frog in the garage. So my daughter told my granddaughter, she's going to take the trash out to the curb, and maybe you might want to get a stick and poke the frog and see if he's awake. Well, she did that, and the frog jumped up in her hair, and it was a big mess. She was screaming and hollering, and anyway, the story ends up that they got the frog out, but it was just both Roland, my granddaughter, and the frog were both scared to death. My daughter got the frog out of the hair, and then they put it outside, and let the frog go. So it was a little bitty green tree frog. You wouldn't think that just running into a little green frog in a garage would cause such a ruckus, but it did. So anyway, I decided to publish it now because I just wanted my kids to, my wife, she had written it, and then just basically for the kids and grandkids, that was the main reason.
What happened to your wife?
She had a disease kind of like Parkinson's, but it was a little worse, but she died from like congestive heart failure because she did have some heart issues and stuff. So, that's pretty much the disease that she really had, didn't cause her death, but the congestive heart failure did, because she exercised one morning and she exercised too much. And so that was the last day.
I'm so sorry. How old was she?
She was 62.
Oh, so young.
Yeah, she was. Yeah. After she was diagnosed with that disease, she was working for the state, but she had trouble. Her vision was kind of getting bad because of this neurological disease, and her motive skills with her hands, affected her work. She got on kind of medical disability, and so that's when I think she started writing. Or she wrote this book. She had a little time on her hands, and so she would stay at the house, and I just really was doing it for the family, and if it does get promoted, well, that's fine. But I just, primarily it was for the family. It's his remembrance of her and stuff. So, anyway.
You're a good man, Ricky.
Well, thanks.
L.A. Williams is a domestic engineer in Tennessee, where she says she writes every single day. When her kids were young, she started reading what they were reading and decided she could write a novel for her kids. It's called The Cave of Mystery, and the characters are based on her son, daughter, dog, and their friends when they were young.
Well, it is about two 12-year-old boys who all year long they hear the kids at school talking about a cave. And no one has been able to find the cave. So these two little boys decide the first day of summer they would go and search for the cave. And they just happen to stumble upon it, but it doesn't look like anything strange or fun. And they tell their siblings about it, and their siblings go with them, and all of a sudden the cave shows its true self. And summer is never the same after that.
Well, there's a witch, there's an old lady. What happens?
There is a lady that all the kids call Old Witch, and they're all scared of this lady because they think she's going to eat them. And once the kids get into the cave, she actually comes from out of the cave, and the kids find out she's not a witch. She's just this beautiful lady that is the guardian of the cave. The moral of the story is friendship is number one. Keeping your word. Family is a big part of it. And staying good. All things can happen in the cave if you wish for it. It's a fun place for the kids to go and to be safe. I am actually doing a Facebook page and Goodreads author program. I'm setting up a page with them.
Okay.
And I'm talking with Barnes & Noble to get some book signings going. I've talked with some schools up in Illinois, where I'm from, to have book signings up there. I just have to wait until they have their book signings and author visits in February.
That will be
Yes.
perfect, yeah.
Oh, yes.
All right, so
That
you're-
would be great.
James Tobin is a full-time anthropology student in California. He writes on the weekends. He wrote his first story when he was 6, and 20 years later, he's published his first book. It's entitled Chemical Philosophy, a Novel of Discovery.
Chemical philosophy is kind of like a spiritual coming-of-age tale. It also deals with issues such as mental illness, substance abuse, and it's kind of like this one big absurd journey through the mind. 2015 to 2016 were some of the most difficult years of my life. I have bipolar 1 disorder, and during those years, my disorder was really flaring up, and I had some really interesting experiences that were somewhat traumatic. And so I sat with it for a few months after I got better, and I said, you know what, maybe I could transform this experience into something that I can share with others.
Good for you. That couldn't have been easy.
It took a lot out of me.
So tell me the story.
The first chapter is kind of like a window into a man's life. He's named Hank Wasserman, and he's going out to the desert in his big van in search of enlightenment because he's met a man who claims that all you need to do to achieve enlightenment is go out to the Mojave Desert at night and look up at all the stars. Then you're introduced to a psychiatrist named Celine Ostrava who works at the local psychiatric hospital. There's two main characters really in the story, Todd Johnson and Isaac Pugh. And when you meet Todd Johnson, he's just hanging out with his friends, and suddenly in the kitchen there appears this angel. And he goes off on a wild tangent and starts believing that he's Jesus. And then you have Isaac Pugh, who's mute. It's called selective mutism. And throughout the story, that wall breaks down as he makes friends and finds a girl to love. Back to Todd Johnson, for a while you follow Todd Johnson's chaotic story as he's trying to reconcile this newfound identity that of being Jesus and how this affects like every aspect of his life and how it puts his friendships at risk. You know, he keeps leaving home and going off on these spiritual quests. He goes out to the local watering hole, and it's karaoke night, and he hijacks the microphone, and he says, you know, greetings, my fellow friends. I am the Christ, and I'm here to guide you all into an era of peace. And then they call security on him. He gets chased out, and this man follows him out and says, you know, I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about your story. So he takes Todd Johnson home, gets him drunk, and then Todd Johnson wakes in the basement tied to a bed, and this man says, you know, you're not Jesus, you're actually Satan. And so that kind of throws Todd Johnson through a loop. And then with Isaac Pugh, he came from a very abusive father relationship, and his mother died when he was 16. Then Isaac Pugh wants to be a writer, so the second chapter is told from the psychiatrist's perspective, and Isaac Pugh is one of her most difficult patients because he doesn't talk. I think the reader's supposed to get out of the story is that keep searching for truth and meaning in your life, no matter what, you know, variables come into play, you know, whatever chaotic incidents come into your life. Just keep searching for meaning and truth and love.
That's good advice, James. Thank you. We are going to take a short break, but we're coming right back. You should too. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books. And unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them. And they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Dennis Merlo is retired from advertising, sales, management, and training outside of Detroit. About 10 years ago, he started a journal and vented about everything from politics to sports and decided to turn it into a book entitled To My Boys. So we know where your inspiration came from.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. They were the motivating force all the way. I kind of kiddingly made the remark in the foreword of the book, hey, I could never get 3.5 seconds attention of my kids. So I decided to put it in written form. It showed the transformation of a young kid who, like a lot of young kids, I mean, I was self-centered. I had some anger and self-control issues. And the growth came when I finally got married and had children. And I was able to really develop a deep connection and love, with my family. And it's so simple, and yet it's so powerful because, to tell you the truth, not everybody has that.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has that. The book does impart a lot of lessons learned along the way. You got to enjoy life on a daily basis and not worry, as my mother used to say, about the small stuff. So I went back to the beginning of my life, 1952, I was born. And it's 75 short chapters. I mean, each chapter kind of talks a new story, a new topic. People get a kick out of the fact that when I came out of college, I wasn't ready to go into the real world right away, and I just absolutely stumbled on becoming a bouncer in a topless bar. Some of the stories in my early days of Yellow Pages where, I would take on the big boss in front of everybody. I mean, people didn't have the guts, if you will, to do that. They had the same feelings within themselves, but they were too afraid to do it, but I wasn't. I had a couple of chapters devoted to the 60s, and I get into things like the Beatles and Muhammad Ali and the riots and the protests. And my one son said, I wish you had written more about that, because he said, actually, the little bit that I wrote about it in the book, he said, gave him more knowledge about the 60s than he even learned in school.
Oh, I believe that.
My parents were as decent and as honorable a set of parents as you're ever going to meet in your life. They were blue-collar people. They were hard workers. My mother ruled the house. If she wasn't working at work, she was working at home, and it was constant. And there wasn't a lot of closeness there. There wasn't time left for that, for my brother and I. And my mother, in her later years, acknowledged that, and she regretted it. And I was not the ideal kid by a long shot. But probably the most heartbreaking point of my life, when we had our first child, Mark, no one was more excited than my mother. And because she wanted to spend time with him that she didn't spend with my brother and I, and she was so excited by Mark. And she got cancer a year after he was born, and she died shortly after. And it still hurts when I talk about it. She was going to make up with Mark for the time she didn't spend with my brother and I, and she didn't get that chance. The simple but powerful message of a connection with love and family, and then with my children, just being able to embrace the real purpose and meaning of life. I love my wife, I love my parents, but the love that you have for your children is unique. But I think that's had in mind as I wrote the entire book.
Oh, that's so sweet, Dennis. Thank you. Robert Knappert was in data processing with a top secret security clearance back in the 60s when they still had key punch machines. In his spare time, he tried to figure out how to win against slot machines, and eventually, well, we'll find out who wins in his book entitled Guaranteed Winning Slots Discovery.
And I can tell you this, it was divine intervention. I was sitting on my patio one night thinking about how to apply a win, goal, and loss limit to slot machines, because that's what I did when I played table games. And all of a sudden it just came to me. I need to have a session amount. I get 30 $10 bills. Each $10 bill is a session. And then based on the amount I'm going to bet, let's say 90 cents, I divide my bet by the session amount, and that tells me how many spins I have. So that gives me 9 spins. So I'm playing. I usually play 90 cents. So as I'm playing, if I win enough money that puts me over to $10, I cash out. And I put $10 back in my bankroll, and whatever I win, I put back into my guaranteed take-home pocket. And that's how that works. The formula's in the book.
For winning slot machines every time.
I guarantee you can cash out all your winnings. Because I've played slot machines where I never got any winnings.
But aren't there a lot of books that tell you how you can win big at the casinos?
Yeah, they're all fake. Mine has a guarantee. There's no other book out there for gambling that guarantees you can win. They tell you, if you use my system, you can retire and live off the money you win. And basically all they're selling is money management systems. And some of the money management systems are good, and if you use them, it's great, but you're still going to end up broke.
If your book doesn't work for me, I get my money back.
Well, not really, because I don't know who buys them. They're sold in bookstores and online.
Well, then how can you guarantee anything?
Well, because I know the system works. I developed it. I use it every time. The thing is, I knew about this thing for a couple of years. And I would go to the casino and play and walk out with all my winnings. Then my family came down to visit, and I showed them how to use it. And I showed my friends how to use it, and I showed my daughter how to use it. Then they all pestered me to death, telling me to write a book. So I finally sat down one day and wrote the book. I'm getting ready to blast out 10,000 emails to sell it.
10,000 emails?
10,000 emails with exact data. They're a marketing company. And when I'm ready, I'll email them the ad, and they'll blast out 10,000 emails with the ad. It's not free. I have to pay for it.
If you send out 10,000 emails, what's the average you're going to get back?
They claim that they have a 28% hit rate.
Oh. Do you like those odds?
I like them.
All right, Robert, roll the dice, baby. Cheryl Venable grew up on a farm in Minnesota and became a minister, but something happened in her 40s to inspire her book entitled Angel's Arms.
My mother said when I had my 40th birthday, I had a midlife crisis. I did 3 things that were out of the ordinary. 1, I started writing poetry. 2nd, I joined a country music artist fan club. The writing of the poetry was the thing that was really out of character because I had never done any kind of writing or shown even an interest in poetry before.
How long ago was that?
Close to 20 years ago. What happened was I had written a poem, and this poem was a conversation between 2 people, and they were lovers. Each one of them was telling the other how up until they had met the other, their lives had been pretty much, really bad, but they were the angels that saved them. And a lot of people liked it. Says, where did this come from? Because everybody knew me, and they knew that my ex-husband, we didn't have much passion, but this was a very passionate conversation. Well, one night, I had gone to bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I said, I've got to answer this question, where this had come from. And I started writing the book. There's two men. One grew up in Minnesota. His parents were Native American, and his father was a trapper. And the other gentleman was from Tennessee, and his parents were Cherokee, and his mother was from a very well-to-do family. And it's a story about their lives and how they ended up, each of them fighting as Union soldiers, and then after the war they became friends, and their kids ended up marrying one another and stuff.
So it helped that your father was a historian.
Oh, yes.
With your research.
The message is kind of twofold. Doesn't matter what your bloodline is. Everybody on earth we deserve to be able to have the right to live free, and we shouldn't tear people down just because they're different. Any time you do something to help people out can be the single thing, most important thing that happens to that person in that day. I'm hoping that people kind of get it. We need it right now.
You're not kidding. You are not kidding. Stephen A. Miller was a stockbroker who owned a couple of businesses, and now he's written a book entitled Reparations, Preventing the Annihilation from CO2 with a Hydrogen Fuel Cell Power System. I'm curious, how do you know about hydrogen fuel cells?
Because I've been studying it for about 3 decades. I've been studying the environment and energy, and It's just a matter of fact Nobody seems to dispute that CO2 is the primary problem that creates the extra heat, that creates climate problems. So I'm going to buy that. And then the only way to generate electric power, enough power to power the entire country, or the world actually, without having CO2 at all, would be to use hydrogen fuel cells. The media has an absolute dogma, propaganda, that protects fossil fuel and never mentions hydrogen. You don't have to capture CO2 if there is no CO2. And the only way to generate electric power without having any CO2 is by using hydrogen fuel cells. That's a primary part of the book. Another issue in the book is that people just don't understand risk. I don't know, how long this is going to take, and nobody else knows it. But when you know if you continue to generate CO2, that eventually it'll become bad enough that the hurricanes and the fires actually wipe us all out, of food in particular. So it's apparent now, especially with these demonstrations, that people are concerned about it. But nobody understands that there's a remedy to it. They're just saying we have to do something, but they don't have any specific way of doing anything about it. Like, okay, we need to use hydrogen fuel cells is the only remedy. There is no other one. That's the main issue in the book. I didn't think there would be so much obstruction to the book, and there is. And that's to save fossil fuel, which is an absurdity. The book sales will fund my campaign for president, and if I'm not the president of the United States, none of this is going to happen, period.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much. And thanks to all of the authors who joined us for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. We're going to call it a wrap and head out of here. 'Tis the season. Why don't you write something about the holidays and send it in? See what happens. You never know. If you missed anything, just go to 710WOR.com and download the podcast. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.